Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in the wisdom of Torah. This week, our Torah portion is Vayishlach, which begins in the book of Genesis with chapter 32, verse 4. We'll read through the English translation of our Torah portion. Then I'll share with you a little bit of focus study, and then we'll open it up for our general conversation. So we begin chapter 32, verse 4, book of Genesis. I'll share with you the opening verses, and then I'll offer everyone else an opportunity to share some verses as well. Jacob sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom, and instructed them as follows. Thus shall you say, to my lord Esau, thus says your servant Jacob, I stayed with Laban and remained until now. I have acquired cattle, asses, sheep, and male and female slaves. And I send this message to my lord in the hope of gaining your favor. The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau. He himself is coming to meet you, and there are 400 men with him. Jacob was greatly frightened. In his anxiety, he divided the people with him and the flocks and herds and camels into two camps, thinking, if Esau comes to the one camp and attacks it, the other camp may yet escape. Paul, would you like to read beginning at verse 10? And you'll have to unmute Paul. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Let's see, 10, where was, whoops. Then Jacob said, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Hashem, who said to me, return to your land and to your relatives, and I will do good with you. I have been diminished by all the kindness and by all the truth you have done. Your servant, for with my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become two camps. Rescue me, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him lest he come and strike me down, mother and children. And you had said, I will surely do good with you, and I will make your offspring like the sand of the sea, which is too numerous to count.
Thank you, Paul. Let me invite Tom and Jackie. Would you like to start reading at verse 14?
After spending the night here, he chose an offering for his brother Esau from what was at hand, 200 goats, 200 he-goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milk camels and 40 camels their young, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 she-asses, 10 he-asses. He put his slaves in charge of each drove separately, saying to his slaves, pass before me and leave some distance between one drove and the next. He instructed the first as follows. If my brother Esau meets you and asks you, to whom do you belong? Where are you going? And who are those ahead of you? Say, they are your servants, Jacob's. It is an offering sent by my lord Esau. In fact, he is following close behind. He's following close behind us. He instructed the second two and the third as well, and all the others who were to follow in droves, saying, this is what you shall tell Esau when you find him. And say as well, in fact, for your servant Jacob is coming behind us. For he reasoned, I will win him over with an offering in advance. Then I will face my pardon and he may pardon me. And so the offering went ahead while he remained at camp that night.
That same night, he got up, took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 children, and crossed at the ford of the Jabbok River. After taking them across the stream, he sent across all that he owned. Now Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the rise of dawn. When the man saw that he could not overcome him, he struck Jacob's hip socket, so that Jacob's hip socket was wrenched as the man wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The other said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." "No more shall you be called Jacob, but Israel," said the other, "for you have wrestled with God and with human beings, and you have prevailed." Then Jacob asked, "Pray tell me now your name." But he said, "Why do you ask my name?" And then he took his leave of him.
Why don't you go ahead and finish through the end of the chapter? Thank you.
Oh, you want me to-
Yeah.
okay. Jacob therefore named that place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. The sun shone on him as he was leaving Peniel, and he was limping on account of his thigh. To this day, that is why the people of Israel do not eat the thigh muscle that is in the socket of the hip, because he struck Jacob's hip socket at the thigh muscle.
Thank you so much, both of you. And then David and Susan, would you like to read beginning at chapter 33?
Yes, thank you very much, Rabbi. And Jacob raised his eyes and saw, and look, Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men. And he divided the children between Leah and Rachel and between the two slave girls. And he placed the slave girls and their children first, and Leah and her children after them, and Rachel and Joseph last. And he passed before them and bowed to the ground 7 times until he drew near his brother. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell upon his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And he raised his eyes and saw the women and the children, and he said, "Who are these with you?" And he said, "The children with whom God has favored your servant." And the slave girls drew near, they and their children, and they bowed down. And Leah too and her children drew near, and they bowed down. And then Joseph and Rachel drew near and bowed down. And he said, "What do you mean by all this camp I have met?" Take it.
And he said, "To find favor in my Lord's eyes." And Esau said, "You have a great deal, my brother. Let what's yours be yours." And Jacob said, "Don't. If I found favor in your eyes, then you'll take my offering from my hand, because on account of this, I have seen your face, like seeing God's face, and you've accepted me. Take my blessing that's been brought to you, because God has been gracious to me, and because I have everything." And he pressed him, and he took it.
Thank you both so much. Bill and Wendy, would you like to read a little bit? We're on verse, let's see, we're on verse 12 of chapter 33.
We are unfortunately unable to do so because we are in the midst of moving,
I
and all
understand.
of our books, including each version of the Torah that we have, is packed.
Well, the fact that you're in transition is a perfect way to be entering into this week's Torah portion. Thank you. So let me invite Dave. Would you like to read there at verse 12?
And Esau said, "Let us start our journey, and I will proceed at your pace." But he said to him, "My Lord knows that the children are frail, and that the flocks and herds which are nursing are a care to me, and if they are driven hard a single day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord go on ahead of his servant, while I travel slowly at the pace of the cattle before me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir." Then Esau said, "Let me assign to you some of the men who are with me." But he said, "Oh no, my Lord is too kind to me." So Esau started back on that day on his way to Seir. But Jacob journeyed to Succoth, and he built a house for himself and made stall for his cattle, and that's why the place was called Succoth. Jacob arrived safe in the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, having come thus far from Padan Aram, and encamped before the city. The parcel of the land where he pitched his tent he purchased from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 kesitas. He set up an altar there and called it El Elohi Yisrael.
Thank you so much. Richard, would you like to read at the start of chapter 34?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Now, Dinah, the daughter whom Leah had borne to Jacob, went out to visit the daughters of the land. Shechem, son of Hamor, the Havite, chief of the country, saw her and took her and lay with her by force. Being strongly drawn to Dinah, daughter of Jacob, and in love with the maiden, he spoke to the maiden tenderly. So Shechem said to his father Hamor, "Get me this girl as a wife." Jacob heard that he had defiled his daughter Dinah. But since his sons were in the field with his cattle, Jacob kept silent until they came home. Then Shechem's father Hamor came out to Jacob to speak to him. Meanwhile, Jacob's sons, having heard the news, came in from the field. The men were distressed and very angry because he had committed an outrage in Israel by laying with Jacob's daughter, a thing not to be done. And Hamor spoke to them, saying, "My son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Intermarry with us. Give your daughters to us and take our daughters for yourselves. You will dwell among us, and the land will be open before you. Settle, move about, and acquire holdings in it." Then Shechem said to her father and brothers, "Do me this favor, and I will pay whatever you tell me. Ask of me a bride price ever so high, and I will pay you what you tell me. Only give me the maiden for a wife."
Thank you, Richard. Let me invite Robin. Would you like to read beginning at verse 13?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceptively, speaking thus because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing, giving our sister to a man who has a foreskin, for this is a shame to us. Only on this condition will we consent to you, if you become like us by having every one of your males circumcised. Then we would give you our daughters and would take your daughters and settle among you and become one people. But if you do not listen to us and consent to be circumcised, we shall take our daughter and leave." Their words seemed good to Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem, and the youth did not delay doing this thing, for he yearned for Jacob's daughter, and he was preeminent in his father's household. So Hamor and his son Shechem went to the gate of their city and spoke to their fellow citizens, saying, "These people are peaceably disposed toward us. They will settle in the land and trade here. Plainly, the land is open wide on every side before them. We will take to wife their daughters and give our daughters to them, but only on this condition have these people agreed to settle among us and become one people. Every male among us must be circumcised as they are circumcised. Their livestock and their possessions, all their animals will be ours. Let us consent to them that they may settle among us." All who went out of the city gate listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male, every able-bodied man was circumcised.
Thank you so much. Justin, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 25?
Thank you, Rabbi. Now it came to pass on the third day, when they were in pain, that Jacob's two sons, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword, and they came upon the city with confidence, and they slew every male. And Hamor and his son Shechem, they slew with the edge of the sword, and they took Dinah out of Shechem's house and left. Jacob's sons came upon the slain and plundered the city that had defiled their sister. Their flocks and their cattle and their donkeys and whatever was in the city and whatever was in the field they took. And all their wealth and all their infants and their wives they captured and plundered. and all that was in the house. Thereupon Jacob said to Simeon and to Levi, you have troubled me to discredit me among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and among the Perizzites, and I am few in number, and they will gather against me and attack me, and I and my household will be destroyed. And they said, shall we make our sister like a harlot?
Thank you so much, Justin. Mark Levinstein, would you like to read at the beginning of chapter 35?
Thank you. God said to Jacob, arise, go up to Bethel and remain there. You build an altar there to God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau. So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, rid yourselves of the alien gods in your midst. Purify yourselves and change your clothes. Come, let us go up to Bethel, and I will build an altar there to the God who answered me when I was in distress, and who has been with me wherever I have gone. They gave to Jacob all the alien gods that they had and the rings that were in their ears. And Jacob buried them under the terebinth that was near Shechem. As they set out, a terror from God fell on the cities round about, so that they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. Thus Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan. He and all the people who were with him. There he built an altar and named it site El Bethel. It was there that God had revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother.
Thank you so much, Mark. Jim, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 8?
Thank you, Rabbi. And Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died and was buried under the oak below Bethel. So it was named Alon Bakuth. God appeared again to Jacob on his arrival from Paddan Aram, and he blessed him. God said to him, you whose name is Jacob, you shall be called Jacob no more, but Israel shall be your name. Thus he named him Israel. And God said to him, I am El Shaddai, be fertile and increase. A nation, yea, an assembly of nations shall descend from you. Kings shall issue from your loins. The land that I assigned to Abraham and Isaac, I assign to you, and to your offspring to come will I assign the land. God parted from him at the spot where he had spoken to him, and Jacob set up a pillar at the site where he had spoken to him, a pillar of stone, and he offered a libation on it and poured oil upon it. Jacob gave the site where God had spoken to him the name of Bethel.
Thank you so much. Mark Thompson, would you like to read beginning at verse 16?
Thank you, Rabbi. They set out from Bethel, but when they were still some distance short of Ephrath, Rachel was in childbirth, and she had hard labor. When her labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, have no fear, for it is another boy for you. But as she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. Thus Rachel died. She was buried on the road to Ephrath, now Bethlehem. Over her grave, Jacob set up a pillar. It is the pillar at Rachel's grave to this day. Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder. While Israel stayed in that land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel found out. Now the sons of Jacob were 12 in number, the sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. Sons of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maid, Dan and Naphtali. And the sons of Zilpah, Leah's maid, Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Paddan Aram.
Why don't you finish up the chapter there, Mark? Thank you.
And Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre, at Kiriath Arba, now Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had sojourned, Isaac was 180 years old when he breathed his last and died. He was gathered to his kin in ripe old age, and he was buried by his sons Esau and Jacob.
Thank you. Do you want to try reading? Chapter 36. This is the line of Esau, that is Edom. Esau took his wives from among the Canaanite women, Ada, daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Oholibamah, daughter of Anna, daughter of Zibeon the Hivite, and also Basmach, daughter of Ishmael and sister of Nebaioth. Ada bore to Esau Eliphaz, Basmath bore Ruel, and Oholibamah bore Jalam, and Korah. Those were the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Paul, would you like to read some more beginning at verse 6? And you'll have to unmute, Paul. Thank you.
Esau took his wives, his sons, his daughters, and all the members of his household, his livestock and all his animals, and all the wealth he had acquired in the land of Canaan. And he went to a land because of his brother Jacob, for their wealth was too abundant for them to dwell together, and the land of their sojourns could not support them because of their livestock. So Esau settled in Mount Seir. Esau, he is Edom. And these are the descendants of Esau, ancestor of Edom, on Mount Seir. These are the names of Esau's sons: Eliphaz, son of Ada, Esau's wife, Reuel, son of Basmath, Esau's wife. The sons of Eliphaz were Teman, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, and Kernaz. And Timnah was a concubine of Eliphaz, son of Esau, and she bore Amalek to Eliphaz. These are the children of Ada, Esau's wife. And these are the sons of Reuel, Nathan and Zerah, Shammah and Mizah. These were the children of Basemath, Esau's wife. And these were the sons of Oholibamah, daughter of Anna, daughter of Zibeon, Esau's wife. She bore to Esau Jesh and Jalam and Korah.
Thank you very much, Paul. Tom and Jackie, would you like to continue the reading at verse 15?
Thanks, Rabbi. These are the clans of Esau's descendants, the descendants of Eliphaz, Esau's firstborn, the clan of Teman, the clan of Omar, the clan of Zepho, the clan of Kenaz, the clan of Korah, the clan of Gatam, the clan of Amalek. These are the clans of Eliphaz, in the land of Edom. These are the descendants of Ada. And these were the descendants of Reuel, Esau's son, the clan of Nahath, the clan of Nahath, the clan of Zerah, the clan of Shammah, the clan of Mizah. These are the clans of Reuel in the land of Edom. These are the descendants of the Basmath, Esau's wife. And these are the descendants of Oholibamah, Esau's wife, the clan of Jesha, the clan of Jalam, the clan of Korah. These are the clans of Oholibamah, daughter of Anah, Esau's wife. These are the descendants of Esau, that is Edom and the rest of their clans.
These are the descendants of Seir the Horite, who dwelt in the land: Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anna, Dishon, Ezer, and Dishan. These are the Horite clans, the descendants of Seir in the land of Edom. The sons of Lotan were Hori and Himam. Lotan's sister was Timnah. And these are the sons of Shobal: Alvan, Manahath, Ibal, Shepto, and Onam. And these are the sons of Zibeon: Ayah and Anah. This is the Anah who discovered the hot springs in the wilderness as he was tending his father Zibeon's donkeys. And these are the children of Anah: Dishon and Oholibamah, Anah's daughter. And these are the sons of Dishon: Hemdan, Eshban, Ithran, and Cheran. And these are the sons of Ezer: Bilhan, Zaavan, and Akan. And these are the sons of Dishon: Uz and Aran.
Thank you so much. David and Susan, would you like to continue with verse 29?
not for sure.
Let's start with these. Let's start with these.
Yeah.
Oh, we're having a muting war here. These are the Horite chieftains, the chieftain Lotan, the chieftain Shobal, the chieftain Zibeon, the chieftain Anah, the chieftain Dishan, the chieftain Azer, the chieftain Dishan. These are the Horite chieftains by their clans in the land of Seir. These are the kings that reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the Israelites. And Bela, son of Beor, reigned in Edom, and the name of his city was Dinhabah.
And Bela died, and Joab, son of Zerah, from Bozrah, ruled in his place. And Joab died, and Husham of the land of Temani ruled in his place. And Husham died, and Hadad, son of Bedad, who struck Midian in the fields of Moab, ruled in his place. And the name of his city was Avith. And Hadad died, and Samlah of Masrekah ruled in his place. And Samlah died, and Saul of Rehoboth on the river ruled in his place. And Saul died, and Baal-Hanan, son of Achbor, ruled in his place. And Baal-Hanan, son of Achbor, died, and Hadar ruled in his place. And the name of the city was Pau, and his wife's name was Mehitabel, daughter of Matred, daughter of Mazahab. And these are the names of the chiefs of Esau by their families, by their places, by their names. Chieftain Timnah, Chieftain Alva, Chieftain Yereth, Jetheth, Chief Holibamah, Chief Elah, Chief Pinon, Chief Kanaz, Chief Teman, Chief Mibzar, Chief Magdiel, Chief Iram. These are the chiefs of Edom by their homes in the lands of their possession, that is Esau, father of Edom.
Thank you so much, everyone. That's our Torah portion for the week. I'd like to share with you a little bit of focus study. And our entry point into this week's study is a work of art by an artist named Jonas Gerard. If you have a study sheet, I invite you to take a look at the painting that's at the top, a painting called Embracing Uncertainty. Now, first, let's get to meet our artist and learn a little bit about him and see what he brings to our table for this week's discussion. Jonas Gerard, who died just last year, September of 2020, was an artist who made his home and established a gallery in Asheville, North Carolina. But he was born in 1941 in Casablanca, Morocco, to parents of French and Brazilian heritage. And much of his art is influenced by and infused with the rhythms of Afro-Cuban music and jazz. He said that the music allowed him to work unpredictably and intuitively, bringing it to a subconscious level where he could respond to the rhythm and the direction that the paintings suggested to him. And dominating his works are light and a sense of choreography. So his work in particular, with silks and dyes, allowed for him a high degree of letting go, of planned outcomes. And when he was working with liquid colors, he said he experienced a sense not of controlling them, of where they needed to go on the canvas, but he experienced a kind of finding the beauty hidden within them when these liquid colors met the silk. So for me, this is a way of getting into this week's Torah portion, we're going to explore a little bit about the character of Jacob and to what extent he wanted to be the artist, the kind of artist who had deep control over exactly where every brushstroke went and how thick or thin the paint was, and to impose upon the canvas some pre-planned narrative or image that he wanted to present, or whether more like our artist Jonas Gerard, he's someone who is willing to give himself over to the spread of the colors on the canvas to see where they led him. I've entitled this week's study session, The Courage to Live with Uncertainty. And uncertainty is not only an aspect of Jonas Gerard's artwork, but he was very conscious about the notion of what it offered him to paint in this kind of way. And so on our study sheet, there's a quote from him, number 1. Uncertainty is a great blessing if you can flow with it. If you're stuck on your determination, on your outcome, then uncertainty doesn't have a chance and miracles can't happen. I like to suggest that our character here, Jacob, is someone who is trapped, like many of us are, in this tension, this conflict between our desire to want to control our life and our yearnings to experience something new, to be surprised, to reach dimensions of ourselves and of the world that we as yet don't know anything about, that they're full of surprises. It's that struggle between the desire to control and the desire to be surprised, to let go in a sense. And in that sense, Jacob is very much this character, and we see that from last week when he had the dream, where he had the ladder and he was going up and coming down. And then if you remember, his response when he wakes up from his dream is this. He wakes up and he says, wow, God was in this place and I didn't expect it. I didn't know that. And what does he immediately say after that? How does he begin to respond to the dream? He says this: if God remains with me and protects me and gives me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and if I return safe to my father's house, then Adonai shall be my God. So Jacob awakens from this profound and exciting and awesome experience, this encounter that he hadn't planned at all. In fact, the Hebrew text says he just happened to bump into God at this place, not expecting it at all. And when he awakens from that dream, what does he do? He immediately tries to seek leverage from having had this dream. He seeks to begin to bargain, to engage in this transactional exchange with God. If you give me this stuff, okay, then we got a deal. You'll be my God. So here it is. At the very beginning of this journey he's on, he has the sense of the unexpected, the encounter, the surprise, but immediately he reverts back to someone who's trying to control the whole situation and use what he has encountered as a kind of bargaining chip. You know, it's interesting in the Hasidic world, the commentary kind of completely reverses what our normal reading of this dream sequence is. We read it as if he has left the material world, entered into this dream, and then returns to the world of true reality. Okay? So the Hasidic commentators kind of reverse that around. They said, no, actually what was happening is before the ladder, he was in a dream world. He was in a world of illusion. And his dream, what we call his dreaming, was actually his awakening. Okay? So when you read it that way, he's asleep, he awakens and has this experience, and then, in a sense, he goes back to being asleep again. Okay. So we want to play also a little bit more about, you know, to what extent is he engaged in a mere dream, and in what sense is he engaged in actually waking up to true reality? So as we follow through Jacob on his journey, when he has the exchange with Laban, where Jacob wants to marry Rachel, and on the wedding night, as we read, the father Laban exchanges Leah for Rachel. And so Jacob ends up marrying Leah, much to his surprise. And he wakes up, and again, this notion of waking up is a kind of a theme here. He wakes up and says to Laban, "What is this that you've done to me? Why did you deceive me?" This is another example of the way that Jacob is proceeding through life based a lot on, at this point, complaint and grievance, even though he has been given these gifts of this encounter, given this gifts of being brought into this family. And what he focuses on is his nature of being deceived, okay, which we know he himself was at one point a deceiver of his own family with his father and his mother and his brother. And later, when Jacob is getting ready to leave with his wives and his children and handmaidens, Laban gets very upset and says, "Oh, why are you stealing away from our home? You're like a thief in the night. You're fleeing secretly. You didn't let me send you off with music and celebrations and allow me to kiss my children." So here is this character, Jacob, who has been given these gifts. He now has all this sheep. We remember from last week's Torah portion, he's amassed great wealth. He has wives, he has children. And yet what is he doing? Once again, he's deceiving someone by sneaking off in the night. So he's going through this, this series of receiving gifts and for momentarily being grateful, and then returning to this other self of him that wants to deceive, because deceit seems to be the best way to be in control of the world. We get to this week's Torah portion, at the end, actually, the end of last week's Torah portion. I think it's the very end of last week's Torah portion, where he reaches a place and it says, he named that place Machanayim. And then a few verses later, in this week's Torah portion, Jacob says, "I have now become two camps," which in Hebrew is Shnei Machanot. The word Machanot, which means camps, we can see in the name of the place from last week's Torah portion that he was now calling where he was dwelling, Machanayim. Machanayim is built on the same word as Machanot, Machana, meaning camp, and Machanayim can literally be read as two camps. So there's some way in which Jacob is building and naming the world outside of himself that reflects the world inside of himself, a world that is divided, bifurcated, split between these two either contending urges within him, the urge to experience wholeness and to give oneself over, if you will, to the gift of wholeness, and the desire to control it. And his methodology for controlling the world at this point seems to be that of deceit and sneaking away. So we get to the high point of, I think, this week's Torah portion, which so many commentators talk about, which is this wrestling match that happens. And that's in chapter 32, verse 25, and a man wrestled with him. So of course, there are a lot of commentators who explore, well, what is happening here? So if you have a study sheet, you can turn it over. And we have three different commentators who talk about this wrestling match. The first commentator is Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, who wrote this: "Fearing the confrontation with Esau, Jacob wanted to run away, and God sent an angel to wrestle with him, to stop him doing so. On this reading, God was teaching Jacob how to wrestle with his fears and defeat them. So this is a nice rendering. It's describing that what's happening here is that Jacob is wrestling with his fears and seeking to overcome them. It's still, Rabbi Sachs' commentary here is still providing this external agent who's teaching a lesson to Jacob. So let's see what else we can kind of parse from that one story of the wrestling match. And this is from Rabbi Beno Jacob. Rabbi Beno Jacob was born in 1862, died in 1945. He was a rabbi first in Poland, and then went to Hamburg, and then went to England. And he wrote this: God answers a person's prayers if the person prays by searching himself, becoming his own opponent. Well, this is lovely. This takes it a little deeper in a sense than Rabbi Jonathan Sachs' commentary, because here Rabbi Jacob is indicating that our character in the Bible, Jacob, is initiating on his own this kind of internal struggle and is thereby rewarded by God. Well, now we're going to look at one more commentator. That's the great 19th century Hasidic rabbi, the Sfat Emet, who wrote this, commenting on the verse, I will deal with you in great goodness. This suggests that God promises Jacob that his sense of his own life will share in the experience of God's goodness. God will not merely be good to Jacob, God will make Jacob accomplice in the benign self-creation of Israel. So now what the Sfat Emet is presenting to us is not that God will intervene and protect Jacob, but that God's implication in Jacob's life is reflected in Jacob's own power to recreate himself. So this is very much within the tradition of the Hasidic approach to all this material, which is that the power rests within inside of each one of us to transform our lives, and our ability to do so, to take responsibility for doing that, is a reflection of the divine that dwells within us. As a result of the wrestling match, we get this a beautiful recitation from the wrestler that says, no longer will your name be Jacob, but Israel. Now, a very kind of common way of understanding this name Israel is to say, oh, Israel means that Jacob has wrestled with beings divine and human and prevailed. But here's another way of reading the name Israel. And I have to admit, I haven't seen this anywhere else, but it's a literal reading of the name Israel, because we know the word, El means God, and the verb sarah means to persist, to exert oneself, to persevere. So a literal way of reading the name Israel is that God persisted, that God persevered, that God exerted itself, rather than reading it as Jacob prevailed. So if we read it that way, it's interesting to think about, what does it mean that God persisted? Perhaps it means that the wrestling isn't over. Perhaps it means that Jacob didn't just wrestle and won the match and walked out of the ring with the gold belt around him as the grand champion, and no one ever challenged him again. He was the great wrestler. Another way of reading it is to say, no, God was the one who won. God was the one who prevailed, and God is ready to take on all comers. And that's a way of saying that the wrestling is never over. Okay. So here's this experience that Jacob has now had. He's had this dream. He's now had this wrestling match. You think that this would be enough to awaken him from his spiritual slumber that he's been in, of trying to control the world, trying to bargain with the world, and to accept his oneness with the world. Instead, what we see with Jacob is that he continues to descend into this realm of bargaining, deceit, of irresponsibility. And here we see towards the end of this week's Torah portion, the incident at Shechem, where in response to whatever this event is between Hamor and Dinah, it is the sons of Jacob who rise up and they develop this plan, and they, like their father, engage in this act of deceit in order to slay all the people of Shechem. And during this entire episode, Jacob is completely silent. And it's not till after it's over that he now says, "Oh, the trouble that you have all brought upon me." Here again, he descends into this world of irresponsibility, of engaging in prevarication, of hiding. And then further we have this terrible loss that happens at the end of our portion with Rachel dying. And not only does Rachel die, but it says she was buried on the road to Ephrath, now Bethlehem. She's not settled in a place. She's buried by the roadside. And so the commentaries are just kind of rich with this imagery of Rachel being this character who is now going to bear witness to the ongoing journey of all those seeking a return to home. She is the figure who is acknowledging that we all are seeking our way home. She bears this role of being the witness to this great what it means to be alive, which is to have these ongoing episodes of greatness and failure, of having a constant source of never quite getting it and always being on our way. So I want to return to our sense of what our artist Jonas Gerard says. He says, human capacity to live with uncertainty and to act hopefully is the source of true miracles. And if you remember, last week we encountered Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, where he said that faith is an aspect of hope. And it's not about a salvation by some external force, but it's an act of human agency, of our capacity to remake ourselves and our world. And our artist is telling us that when we accept that uncertainty as an aspect of life, then we can act with a sense of hope within that. And when we do that, that is when we make miracles. So with that, I'd love to open it up and hear how you responded to this week's Torah portion, share your thoughts and your questions, your provocations and your observations, and go ahead, David.
I think I disagree a little bit. It seems to me that when Jacob is given the name Israel, which we can read as God triumphs or God wrestles forever with Jacob, or as it is traditionally translated, God wrestled with God. I believe he's transformed. And while he does exhibit some trickery later when he leads his brother to believe he's going to follow him and goes the opposite direction. Mostly what he does, including that, is avoid. He ignores and avoids the rape of Dinah and his son's massacre of the people of Shechem, and then he runs from it. And he's passive about Reuben's seduction of his handmaid, until essentially he punishes both Reuben and Levi and Simeon, Simeon and Levi because of Shechem, and Reuben because of his handmaid Bilhah, when he provides his blessings as he's dying, where essentially he curses them, Levi landless, for example. Where he seemed like in the episode of the lambs and sheeps and goats and the speckles and the spots, etc., actively trying to change the results of outcomes. But after this wrestle with God, he's motionless.
I'm going to say something about the end of Jacob's life in a moment. So thank you for raising that. Let me go ahead, Paul. Thank you, Dave.
I'm going to continue David's point. You know, in the way I would call it a case of cherry picking. You know, you have the first parts where he's wrestling, and there's 3 rabbis in a row, and they are able to come up with a very delicious message, which I believe in. But the problem I have with it, they don't read 2 lines further, where what happened there? He wound up with this broken hip. It's like not just one sentence, there's 2 sentences about that there was damage done to him. And so if I were to look at this thing, rather than sentence by sentence, more like David does, is, hey, he wrestled with the God, he got hurt, and boy, when he came to meeting his brother, he put out the wife, the kids, the sheep. He was the last one. So if I look at the continuity, you know, going from, you know, just rather than sentence by sentence, by looking at the flow of the story, it seems that why did they put in this thing about he got hurt? Well, he wrestled with somebody and he lost. And then now when it comes to the next fight, you know what? The kids go first. So I'm not the rabbi, but it just seems that if I connect the 2, I look at the other 3 rabbis and I say, hey, I don't see the explanation of the broken hip.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Let me go ahead, Mark Thompson.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up also on David's comment and wanted to ask you, David, from your perspective then, was Jacob transformed negatively in that he now became passive? Or how do you view the transformation? Then I wanted to follow up with another.
I think it's a Zen koan. I think he's made passive. I think he's wounded. Good point, Paul. Thank you. Wounded and immobilized. But another way of looking at that is he's lets events happen, like the paint flowing on the painting. And while it's easy to look at that as saying he became a less good person, that it was a negative thing that happened to him. I think there underneath it all has to be some wisdom there hidden, that because my religion says that kind of passivity is a positive trait.
Interesting. Well, that in a way that helps me interpret the last sentence that we read of Sfat Emet, when he says, God will make Jacob accomplice to the benign self-creation of Israel. That word benign was troubling me, but now with your explanation, it gives me a different taste of that word, and I'm allowed to accept it. And yet now it's kind of a contradiction to Rabbi's contention that Israel is a literal translation of Sarah El, in which God now is persevering, and we have very little to do with Jacob having any activity at all in this whole thing. So I think these words are fascinating to tease.
Thanks, Mark.
My midrash should make him into a Zen master who does zero, nothing, until the absolute critical moment where he does the absolute minimum to avert an outcome or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
So just a couple of thoughts.
Yeah, please.
One is that after this wrestling match, right? So after the dream, you think after the dream of the ladder, you think, wow, okay, his life is now changed forever. It's not changed forever for the good, because he ascends and descends. He has these heights of experience, and then he reverts back into the world of bargaining and deceiving. And I want to suggest that he has this wrestling match, and you think that, wow, he prevailed, this is amazing. So once again, he has this lesson and is now permanently transformed. And yet we see what happens the very next day. On the one hand, positively, he reconciles with his brother. He gives his brother back exactly what he took from him, the blessing, okay? And the brother is so happy. He says, oh, we're back together again. Let's go back to our home. We'll be together again. We'll play baseball together and everything will be wonderful. And what does Jacob do? He says, go on ahead. I'll be right behind you. I'm with you. And then he eventually peels off. He peels off. He lied to his brother. Okay. So Jacob is this character who represents the fact that this transformation of experiencing this wonder doesn't seem to, for most of us anyway, have a permanent impact on us. It's a daily and constant source of struggle between our desire to control, to manipulate, to lie, to deceive, and then sometimes the realization that, wow, if I just let go, then everything will be fine. I will have everything if I just let go. So go ahead, Richard.
I noticed in 31, Jacob says, I've seen a divine being, or the divine, or God, and I've lived to tell about it. And just a couple of lines later, he sees Esau. He said, oh, seeing you is like seeing God, and I'm still alive. And I think in terms of this painting, I think of the idea of being in the flow. I told my son one time that I thought we should live in the present. He said, you can't live in the present. It's too tiny. You have to be in the flow. And my thought here is that God is a verb. And he comes and acts through people. He needs our lives to accomplish the route toward righteousness, that our consciousness turns into conscience, and we as a human group are a righteous group. It's very, very hard to do. And people get a piece of it and do part of his work, and then the next day they go off and do their own stuff again and again and again and again and again. And I think that Jacob is all of us. He's every man. And once in a while, God finds us in a good mood, or having read something, or having done our meditation, or having grown and developed something and an understanding and be ethical. And you can lose connection with it, and it fades, and it goes on to the next person, or maybe it'll come back to you. And I think that's all these people, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. And who's left? Who's left? The mother, Rachel. She's standing there waiting for us to come back home, not to Israel, not to land, but to righteousness. And we have a hard time doing it.
Thank you so much. Tom and Jackie has a hand up, and then Susan.
Yeah, I have my hand up, Rabbi. Unfortunately, I identify with Jacob or Israel. I don't know how many times I have, God, if I believe if I can get an A on this test, I'll follow you everywhere. And after I get the A, I work for this. I don't need your help. I mean, how many, if you get me out of this scrape, God, I'll be a devout follower. Yeah, I did this, I got out of this by myself. So unfortunately, like Richard said, it's in all of us. I've got that, and that's the way. And I think it's interesting you brought up years ago about how there's a new branch of Judaism, the Christianity, where they have saints and these wonderful, perfect people, and you've got some real scoundrels, and I identify with it, unfortunately. So that's it. Pray for me.
Thank you. Let me call him. Thank you, Tom. God bless you. Look, Susan.
So, but I was really taken with chapter 35, 23, or actually a little bit later, 27. And Jacob came to Isaac, his father, in Mamre. And Jacob and Esau come together to bury their father. And so with all of the things that's transpired between them and all of the things that they've done, both of them really, that have not been all that great, they still come back together in peace and to honor their father and to bury him at Mamre. I'm just touched by it, just as I was when Ishmael and Isaac came back and buried Abraham.
Thank you. That is very touching. Thank you so much, Susan. I'm going to wrap up our session together. It's been a very exciting and dynamic discussion. And let me just suggest this, which is the one thing that we can be certain of in this life is that there will be moments of uncertainty. And the question is, how do we navigate through those moments? And one way to navigate through them, I guess, is a sense of grievance, resentment, fear, and then externalizing that fear by imposing ourselves, even perhaps to a level of violence on others, thinking that that will gain us greater control over our life, when in fact, what it does is quite the opposite. It diminishes our sense of control. So how do we move through these moments of uncertainty, as our artist says, is in a sense to just accept that there will be these moments of uncertainty. And as Rabbi Sachs taught us, to move through them with hope, which is not optimism, it's hope, which means the knowledge that we matter, that our lives matter, and that we do has the capacity to change ourselves and the world around us. And I know this to be true, which is that it's hard to do that alone. And it is much easier to act with hope during these moments of uncertainty when you do it in the companionship and company of others who are engaged on the same path. And that's why I'm so grateful to be engaged with all of you. It gives me great hope to move through these moments of uncertainty, knowing that we're all struggling through it together. So thank you all very much. I look forward to our next gathering, which won't be next Thursday because we're going to give thanks next Thursday. And so we'll see you the Thursday after that on December 2nd. God bless you all. Be well. Thank you so much.
Bye. Happy
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thanksgiving,
Rabbi.
everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving,
Well,
Night all.
everybody.
Bye. Thanksgiving.